I think the most powerful leaders are the ones who can ask the most powerful questions and who encourage people around them to do the same thing.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Marilee Adams. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Marilee. 1, she's written 4 books. In fact, in August, she released 2 books. The first one was the 4th edition of Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. 12 powerful tools for leadership, coaching, and results. A business and leadership fable. And the second book that she published in August was Change Your Questions, Change Your Life Workbook. Master your mindset and question thinking. And by the way, the Fable book has sold over, this just pains me, 400,000 copies in 22 languages, and mostly promotion through word of mouth. The second fact about Marilee is she's the founder and CEO of the Inquiry Institute. It's a consulting, coaching, and educational organization that works internationally with organizations and government agencies, large and small. The third fact about Marilee, she is a senior brown belt in karate, and that was 20 years ago. These days, it's mostly yoga for her. Marilee, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Well, and I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you.
Delighted to be talking with you, and I'm sure glad that we're not sparring because I only made it to orange.
Oh, actually, I was going to correct you and say I couldn't do most of it now, but I do have the belt. And it was a wonderful experience for me to do that.
Definitely. Now, our topic today is about questions, how to use questions. So let's just start right there. What was the question that you posed to yourself that launched you into studying karate?
Oh, what an interesting question. There actually were a few. I noticed as a woman growing up in the South, which I did, that, and in a family that was pretty conflict avoidant, that I needed to develop myself and be able to deal with conflict, not just emotionally and cognitively, but also physically. And so I figured if I start taking martial arts, then I'm going to put myself right in the middle of the action and learn to develop a part of myself that I hadn't before.
Now, I'm curious, you certainly studying any martial art, you're prepared, and when you're active in training, you're prepared to defend yourself physically. Here's what I noticed, and I'm wondering if this happened to you. Even though you're prepared to defend yourself physically, most of the time you don't because you are better prepared mentally.
Well, that's interesting. There is a mental component to all of the martial arts, and we'll get into the mindset work in a few moments. But I know that there were many times when I was in class, there were a lot of classes where I felt not competent, like I couldn't do it, and sometimes even found myself in tears, and then needed to, while you're on the mat, switch, because you cannot be in that emotional state and be proactive in an effective way. So it was a constant returning myself to what I call learner mindset, rather than judging myself and what I wasn't doing. So it turned out to be an exercise for my mind as well as for my body.
And you raised the learner mindset
Mhm.
versus the judging mindset, and that's something that you talk in your book about. Please tell us, what's the difference? What's the distinction, and why is it important?
Okay, I'm going to describe each, and I'm also going to show you a model that makes it easier to do that. So, first of all, let's assume that all of us, every human being, has two mindsets. One I call judger, and the other I call learner. It's important to remember we all have both. Both are normal, and we will always have them because we are not only neurologically hardwired for them, but we're also socially ingrained in them. So when I talk about being in judger mindset, that means that I'm being more closed-minded, more putting myself or others down, being more judgmental, because judger means judgmental. And it can lead to a lot of self-doubt and also interacting with other people in ways that are not respectful and may actually be dismissive. So, but that's part of all of us. And even if we don't like that part, that doesn't mean it's not there. And it's really useful to say, oh yeah, that's me too. I accept all the parts of me. And if we can speak that, we would be speaking from learner mindset, which we all have. And when we're in learner mindset, we're more open-minded, more accepting, more able to look from other people's point of view and be dedicated to what can I create and learn in this situation and with this person. So we all have both mindsets all the time. What makes it powerful is that when we can observe the mindset we're in and then ask ourselves, will this mindset, let's say it's judger, will this mindset help me get to where I want to go in this situation? Most of the time, the answer is no. But unless we can observe our mindsets, we might not even notice that. So it's important to know, and I'm going to show this and I'm going to make a comment about it to your listeners and your viewers. So this, wait, here it is. I get this confused but this is called the choice map. And we all have both mindsets, the judger mindset and the learner mindset. And at any moment, we're in one or the other. And if we notice we're in judger, we can start to use the switching lane. So it becomes a very practical how-to. So I know that this podcast is mostly auditory, which means people are not seeing it. But I do want to say that if you're interested in the choice map, go to my website, which is www.inquiryinstitute.com. Oh dear, sorry, I forgot to undo that. Now I could go judge on myself for forgetting to do that or just carry on. It's going to click in just a minute. So you can go to my website. You can get the choice map for free. So there's a protocol for how to do it. You take a short quiz, which is also gets you some useful information, but then you can have the choice map and use it. And it's the core of not only Change Your Questions, Change Your Life, but all the other books that I've written and the work that I do that George, you mentioned a bit in the beginning. So does that answer your question?
I think it's a good start because it raises more questions with me.
Uh-huh.
And for those who are interested in the choice map, who will get the most use of that, and where will that help them the most?
Well, that's a more expansive question than you realize, because I have a personal goal of having the choice map in every office, on every refrigerator, and in every classroom, because the principles of the choice map lead to better thinking, better relating, better results. And it turns out to be incredibly practical and easy to use. So I know this is going to sound weird, but I haven't found a place yet where these principles aren't useful and practical.
And the choices are between going judgmental or learner mode. That's the two choices.
Yeah, well, we're making choice on the path of our lives. We're making choices moment by moment by moment. And so I'm adding in that we're also making choices about our mindset. And I think actually the most important choice we make moment by moment is what mindset to be operating from, because that's going to influence everything else. And it makes it kind of simple. Like, am I in learner or am I in judger? If I'm in judger, if I stay here, is that going to help me get the results I want? If the answer is no, you could ask yourself, well, how else can I think about this? Which does orient people to be thinking from different perspectives, which is learner. And for me, one of the most important questions to help people switch from judger to learner is, who do I choose to be in this moment? And that's a powerful question, regardless of the context in which we're asking it. It could be a professional situation. It could be a personal situation. Many people use the choice map with their relationships at home, as well as their relationships at work and with their teams, as a matter of fact.
And Marilee, if I understand right, so when we're in judgment mode, we're thinking more of, I know the answer. I know what to do. I know everything. I know more than you. That's judgmental. While we're in learner mode, our thinking is more, I'm wondering. I'm curious. What don't I know? What do I need to find out? What can I do better? So the learner is about asking questions, being curious. However, you said that when we're in judgment, either mode, do we need to switch? We need to first ask the question, but yet when we're in judgment, we're less likely to ask a question. So how do we ask a question to get into learner mode?
First, you have to notice you're in judger, and you have to notice non-judgmentally, which is a real challenge. But that's the first thing. The second thing is to know that it's always possible to switch. And the third thing is to want to, because sometimes people don't, including me sometimes. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. I still work this work every day. No kidding. And I teach people all around the world to use this work, and they use it in every context that you can imagine. You did a really nice job, by the way, of laying out those two things. And I want to bring this around to when we're asking questions. I'm going to give you a few little like soundbite things for people to hold on to. So when we're asking questions, we could also ask ourselves, what do I want my question to accomplish? And that folds very nicely, George, into what's my intended message? In what way do I want the other person to be impacted? And then those questions are really very orienting and practical in terms of what I do next. So, and you can also think in terms of great results begin with great questions. So that means it's really important to be able to think about the power of the questions that we're asking ourselves and that we're asking others, because most people think the power is in the answer. And I think the power is in the question. And if we take that into leadership and think about leadership, most people, particularly people who are working off of old models of leadership, where the leader has the answer and everybody else salutes, that's not the way we think about leadership these days. And so I think the most powerful leaders are the ones who can ask the most powerful questions and who encourage people around them to do the same thing. Then the answers and solutions that people come up with will be far richer and more generative and useful. And I see this happen over and over with the clients I work with the coaching clients, with the consulting clients. It's pretty remarkable how simple it becomes when you can see the world this way, and when you can notice your mindsets, notice the power of your questions, and be careful and intentional about the questions you ask yourself and others.
And Marilee, I'm hearing there that all questions aren't created equal, that some questions are better than others. Do you believe the phrase, there are no dumb questions?
I have some caveats with that question, with that statement. Yeah, I have some caveats with that because it's always going to be contextual, and it's always going to be in the context of a relationship or a situation. If you're leaving a really important meeting and in the last 30 seconds you drop in a question that makes everybody go like that, and there's no time to respond to it, it might be a great question, but the timing was terrible. So there's always that context. In general, I would say being curious is almost always going to make people more powerful and have them learn more and think about more options. And of course, when we ask questions, we are curious. But I also have a definition for you of question, because in my world, a genuine question is one to which we don't already know the answer. And George, why are you going,
That resonates with me because I've heard the advice, which I don't necessarily agree with. The advice is that before you ask questions of your team, you should know the answer.
Oh, how disempowering that is to a team. The actual orientation could be, I don't have all the answers. And with this X situation, the more viewpoints and questions that we can collect, the more powerful we'll be together. So let's think together and come up with questions together. And the results will end up being more useful and more satisfying. The only George, politicians don't ask questions unless they know what they're going for. But hopefully in our work lives and in our home lives, we're not politicians.
Or prosecuting attorneys.
Right. That won't do well in people's marriages or relationships with their kids or people at work.
So I'm hearing that of the two modes, learner mode, judgment mode, we want to be in learner mode as much as possible. Is there ever a good time to be in judgment mode?
Well, before I answer that, I'm going to say, so the ideal is to get more stable in learner and minimize judger, but to remember that we all have judger, we always will, it will creep in. And that's why this is a moment by moment phenomenon, which also increases mindfulness, because as we're aware of where we are and asking truly curious questions, that's really useful. The question you asked is it ever useful to be in judger? It's useful to ask discerning questions, and it's useful to push in terms of eliciting and challenging assumptions, because without that, we all have blind spots. And if we don't question our assumptions, we have a lot more blind spots that could get us in trouble. It's also useful to remember that judger may look, quote, bad, but I don't look at it that way. I say it's part of all of us. And sometimes when people show up as being very judgmental, and people can be very loud that way, it's useful to listen to them with the learner question, what is it they really care about that I'm not understanding what they're communicating? So the point is not to go judger on people who are in judger, but to get curious about them. And from that position, we can talk together and come together on something rather than being opposed. We could actually have this kind of conversation.
Marilee, that's an insightful lesson there, because I'm thinking of there are some people in my life who know what they know, and there's no way around it. And when I'm talking with them, I go into judgment, and I just think, well, there's no way getting through to them. And I might say, well, no, you don't know that. You believe that. And I'm wondering why you believe that. No, I know. And there's the end of the conversation. But if I were to approach it with my own question, saying, I wonder why they feel so strongly about that. I wonder if they feel threatened. Maybe those are questions that if I asked myself, I might be more understanding.
You know what? That's really a beautiful way to frame it, George, because you also could be asking them questions. You could say, you know what? You have a position or an opinion X about Y, and I realize I don't understand enough about what you're thinking or how you got to it. Could you explain that to me? Now you've created a collaborative dialogue rather than one where you're trying to convince somebody of your opinion, which doesn't ever work. Because when we try to convince people of our opinion, they usually get more entrenched in their own. So the first question is, how can I speak to this person in such a way? And I'm now going to use a sort of technical term, but it's not. But I talk about if we're listening with judger ears, typically they're closed to the outside and we're just listening to our own opinion. And if we listen with learner ears, we're actually curious and interested in what they have to say. And we might even learn something. But it's what we want to avoid is something becoming oppositional, polarized, and it doesn't help the relationship, nor does it help our thinking in terms of whatever the issue is.
And what I noticed there, the question, so if I don't agree with this person, instead of me asking them to defend, I take a gentler approach and say, well, I don't understand. I would sure like to know more about what leads you to that conclusion, that observation, what's been your experience. So if I were to approach that, that's not threatening and it's not condescending. It's just that I'm curious. So,
yeah, and the only little change I would make in that, George, is it's not a gentler approach. It's actually a more strategic approach with an intention of having a conversation in which you both can learn. And that can be very useful. But also what that says to the other person is, I respect you. I may not agree with you, but I respect you. And I'm interested in learning about where you're coming from. Not only is that truthful, but it's also disarming when people are very in a posture of defending. But no useful conversation is going to come out of defending.
And Simon Sinek will tell us that the big question is why. However, I believe that when you pose the question why to someone, they feel like you might be attacking.
Well, that's a very interesting observation. I'm familiar with his work. I like what he says a lot. And what you said is also true, that when people, George, if we were looking at it, let's say we're a team and we're going, well, X occurred, let's explore why that happened. That's really important. But by contrast, if somebody has done something that you don't think is really great, and you say, well, why did you do that? That's going to make them feel like a 3-year-old who has to defend, like, when you say, Johnny, why did you hit your brother? Well, Johnny doesn't know. So the question why often puts people in a defensive stance. But there are a lot of ways around that. So, and this is part of what I teach in question asking. So if you want to ask why, you could also put it like, I'm really curious about why you were thinking that way. So I've used the why word, but I haven't started the sentence out with it. And it makes it easier for people to understand. Or what was your theory behind XYZ. You've asked them why, but you haven't used the word why. Remember, the goal always is to speak in such a way that the other person feels invited to participate and also question and to be in a collaborative dialogue with you. So you want to be asking questions and coming from a place that really does genuinely invite that.
Do you discourage people from being the judge?
I would change that question a little bit. So when they learn about the model of learner-judger and they start to see what the costs have been in their lives and in particular situations of being in judger rather than learner, then I don't need to convince them of anything. They start to go, oh, this problem occurred because I was in judger and I was just obstinate. Maybe there's a different way to go about it. And truthfully, judger is, as human beings, it's always our default position. It's where we go. It's when we go reactive. It's fear-based. And it's very useful to accept that part of us because it is part of us, and then to see what there is to learn from it. It's also important, George, not to go judger on other people when they're in judger, because then you end up with like judger squared rather than moving to a position where you can actually listen to each other, relate to each other, and maybe come up with some shared solutions together.
And I'm realizing that there are times when we need to make decisions. So when you're saying about judger mode, you're not saying don't make decisions.
No.
You're saying be aware of where your mind, where your perspective is on this issue, this conversation, this plan.
Exactly.
And you still need to make decisions. So you're not saying avoid making decisions.
No. In fact, this is a protocol for making decisions, because is this the right thing to do now? What would other people say about it? What am I missing? What information might somebody else have that I don't know? When I want to do X, if I do it this way, what will happen? If I would go that way, what will happen? So it turn those internal questions that I call question thinking can actually turn into a decision tree and make decision making have more alacrity to decision making itself. And to your other point, judgmental is not the same thing as making judgments. When we are judgmental, we're literally wearing blinders or metaphorical blinders, and we don't see what's outside of our blinders or our bias. But to make the best decisions, we need to have peripheral vision. So to make the best judgments, we need to have peripheral vision, not tunnel vision. Got
it. Marilee, for those who might be more interested in how we've told them about the choice map, there's also courses on your website that they might be interested in that can help them through this process. That website, again, is inquiryinstitute.com. You can find a link below in the description, and you can find more information about this thinking, this type of thinking and this process. Marilee, before we wrap up, if you could sit down with a new leader, new team leader who's wants to lead the team, they need to show their stuff, what 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice would you give them to apply this type of thinking in building their team?
I would have them build relationships with everybody in the team, but they have to be genuine. It can't be, well, I'm talking to you because I have to relate to you. You've got to actually really care about what people have to say and what they're coming from, where they're coming from. I think it's important to assume that people bring a lot of value, and that you want to be inviting them to contribute that, which means you want to invite them to have their voice in the room. in an important way. And I also really love the work. I'm going to reference somebody else's book, Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And lots of times new leaders have a kind of tactical operational background, but not necessarily the skill set of relating to people as a leader. And so there are different skills that we need to move from a more operational intervention to being a leader and really listening and encouraging other people to provide for us. And I think that's a really important piece, that the more we are leaders, the more we have to pay attention to our social skills and our work at empowering others and our commitment to curiosity and asking them, because they may have thinking that's richer and more useful than what we have. So there's a kind of honoring and respect that goes implicitly for me into being a leader. And I have to say, the last chapter of Change Your Questions, Change Your Life is titled The Inquiring Leader, which kind of tells you where I'm coming from with this, because inquiring leaders ask questions and don't assume they have all the answers and need everybody else to follow them. And you can see I could talk for hours about that one.
And I see so much deeper we could go, and perhaps another time. My guest today is Marilee Adams, reminding you that great results begin with great questions.
And to keep on asking.
If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.